Great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Vital Sites webinar for today. I'm Yan Perico, and I'm the Executive Officer of the IUCN World Commission Protected Areas. And this is part of Vital Sites webinar series, The Road to Abu Dhabi. This session is part of a broader effort that we're leading at WCPA in collaboration with the IUCN Protected and Conserved Areas. Before we dive in, just a few quick housekeeping notes. So first is to please keep your microphones muted throughout the sessions to avoid any background noise. If you have any burning questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will either respond directly there or during the Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. And just a reminder, this session is being recorded, and we will also share this with the participants afterwards. I will also share that the WCPA Impact Report is now available. I will add a link to the chat. And if you're curious about the previous Vital Sites webinars, we will also drop the link to the full series in the chat. So now I will pass it on to Lauren, who will be our webinar host for the entire session. Over to you, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Yan. Yeah, we're really excited to share this new technical report from IUCN on establishing marine protected areas in a changing climate. And our agenda is that we will hear a few opening words from WCPA Vice Chair Felipe Paredes. Then I'll give you an overview of the report, and then we will hear from 3 case studies from different locations around the world that are highlighting how they are integrating climate change into planning and managing marine protected areas. We will have plenty of time for questions and discussions, and we're really interested in hearing your comments and learning from you. And so without any further ado, I will turn it over to Felipe. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Felipe Paredes. I'm the Vice Chair for the Marine team at the World Commission of Protected Areas of IUCN. It is my great pleasure to be here today launching a new technical report on establishing marine protected areas in a changing climate in partnership with the International Partnership for MPAs, Biodiversity and Climate Change, and JNCC. This is for the Commission. This is a very important technical and scientific advice for the global MPA community because it's making the link between 2 very important crises we're facing today and our oceans are facing. One is the crisis of biodiversity loss, and as you know, area-based management tools like MPAs are one important tool to face this biodiversity loss crisis. And in parallel, we are also facing a climate change crisis, and it's important to make a link, the linkages between these 2 crises. And I think this technical report is doing exactly that, making or using MPAs and marine OECMs as a tool to face both crises, climate change and biodiversity loss. So, and that's at the core of what we think and what we do at the Commission. What we do at the Commission is basically we provide and develop technical and scientific advice and policy that promotes a representative and effectively managed system of protected and conserved areas, in this case, marine protected areas. So this is very important because one way of providing that technical and policy advice is by publishing this technical report. So we're very happy to have this new publication. As you know, we're currently we have a little more than 8% of the ocean protected as MPAs in different categories. So we need to move fast. We need to move to accelerate the establishment of MPAs, but we have to be very strategic, and we have to consider how the environment is changing, how climate change is affecting the marine system. And I think this technical report, this new publication is doing exactly that. So, and another thing I would like to say that is also very important in this technical report, that is considering equity and inclusivity as a core principle of the management of MPAs. And that's important because we know that this is part of our global goals to consider equity and inclusivity. But this is a very practical and hands-on way of doing that inclusion of these important concepts in the MPA. So with that, I would like to thank our partners, but especially the leadership of Lauren Wenzel that have been pushing this very important technical report of WCPA. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much, Felipe. So I'm going to go ahead and give you an overview of the report itself. And then just as a reminder, we hope you can stay for the whole thing because we're going to have case studies from the Kenya-Tanzania border about a new conservation area being planned, brought to us by WIOMSA. And then we're also going to have a case study from the Coral Triangle Center about MPA established in Indonesia and from the United Kingdom on highly protected MPAs. So look forward to hearing those. All right, next slide, please. So as Felipe mentioned, this is a brand new report, just came out yesterday on establishing marine protected areas in a changing climate. And it is a partnership between WCPA and the International Partnership on MPAs, Biodiversity and Climate Change, together with the UK's JNCC. And we're really pleased to share this. And the goal of this report is to help countries, communities, and their partners plan, design, and implement new and expanding MPAs and MPA networks that build climate resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. And this climate smart approach helps ensure that MPAs deliver those biodiversity and conservation benefits over the long term, and that they are lasting and equitable. And I want to note that although the title of this is Establishing Marine Protected Areas in a Changing Climate, we're really talking about protected and conserved areas. So that includes OECMs, areas managed by Indigenous peoples. These principles apply broadly to all of those different types of areas. Next slide, please. So when we talk about why it's so important to think about climate and establishing MPAs, it's because MPAs play a critical role in mitigating climate change impacts because they provide havens for marine life, they promote resilience, and they enable ecosystems to adapt to changing conditions. And all of that helps preserve their ability to deliver ecological, social, and economic outcomes. Next slide. So these are the 4 principles that are the core of this report. And what I'm going to be doing is walking through each of these principles in the coming slides. But those are to understand change, to strengthen adaptation and resilience, to ensure equity and inclusivity, and to generate holistic co-benefits. And these principles build on existing guidance for protected areas and MPA networks, and they also align with the IUCN Green List standard that provides recognition for well-designed and managed protected and conserved areas. So we're really trying to build on the existing body of knowledge and take it to that next step in terms of how do we think about climate in those earliest stages of MPA planning and establishment. Next slide. So this is our first principle, which is around understanding change. And what we need to do is understand, model, and monitor past, current, and future environmental, ecological, social, and cultural change to inform marine protected area managing, planning, and adaptive management. And, developing this understanding early in the process allows that strong foundation for managers to incorporate adaptive management and strategy into the management process for the MPA. And that graphic you'll see on the right is an adaptive management planning process. And it was developed broadly for natural resource management, but it's very applicable to marine protected area planning and management. And one of the things you'll see in this cycle is that there are several places where we need to reassess our understanding based on new information that we're learning. So we assess climate impacts and vulnerability, we develop goals and objectives, and those may need to be revised as we learn more about climate impacts. And that adaptive management takes us entirely through that cycle as we track progress and then evaluate how we're doing and look at our goals and objectives again. Next slide. So monitoring is really foundational for this. And it's really important to have good baseline monitoring when we are establishing an MPA, because it can help us understand what changes are already happening and can often tell us the causes of those changes. So it's a really important opportunity to understand the current conditions at the time the MPA is being established. And the type of monitoring we do is tied to the goals and objectives of the MPA. So that would typically be around the conservation objectives of habitats, species, but also socioeconomic aspects such as human uses and human benefits from the MPA. And so examples of data collection might include field surveys, satellite monitoring, acoustic monitoring, and monitoring is expensive and can be difficult to implement. And so there are opportunities to work with partners like universities and NGOs to establish and sustain monitoring programs. Next slide. In addition to monitoring existing conditions, we need to be thinking about what will future conditions look like. And so we have tools like climate and ecological monitoring and scenario planning to help us understand what future conditions may look like. And these are important to understand at the site level, but also at regional and global scale. And there are different tools that are applicable at different spatial scales. And we can identify those and use those to help us understand how some of those broader pressures and changes will affect conditions in our MPA. Next slide. So just to talk about these tools for a minute, some examples of tools that are really useful in understanding change are to map biodiversity data, so to use geographic information systems to visualize existing and future distribution of habitats and species, to use distribution models for species and habitats, to understand where they are likely to occur based on different environmental conditions. So these can include future climate conditions, such as those being used by the climate models based on levels of economic activity and climate mitigation efforts. We have, based on the IPCC, a series of climate scenarios, and we can use those to generate maps of environmental conditions based on those inputs. And then, of course, we have traditional spatial tools for MPA planning and conservation planning like Marxan that can help us understand trade-offs, economic and ecological trade-offs between different types of network development. Next slide. So the next principle is to strengthen adaptation and resilience. And this is around proactively providing effective area-based conservation in a changing climate to support adaptive and resilient ecosystems. And I'm going to talk about various aspects of this over the next few slides. So next slide. So the first is around establishing climate-informed goals. And historically, MPAs and MPA networks have been designed and designated to meet a specific set of goals and objectives that are usually focused on the protection and conservation of species and those associated ecosystem services. But as ocean conditions continue to change, MPA networks are going to need to establish conservation objectives and goals that explicitly consider climate. And so these are some of the questions that managers should be asking themselves as they're establishing an MPA. What habitats and ecosystem services and features do you want to protect? How are they expected to change due to climate impacts? What types of management will be needed to sustain them? And often to be thinking about what kinds of ecosystem functions do they provide, because species may be changing and we may not be able to sustain those particular species in that place, but we may be able to sustain the functions through other species that may be better adapted to those new conditions. So we really have to be willing to think more broadly about conservation than perhaps the traditional conservation framework. Next slide. We also need to think about boundaries. Boundaries are established to provide lasting protection for target ecosystems and features, but they don't only provide the protection for the species as they are today, but we should be thinking about where will those species be in the future based on expected climate conditions. And so, we need to be asking ourselves, is the MPA large enough or connected enough to allow for species range expansions? Does it include refugia? Refugia being places where species are expected to persist because of environmental conditions in that place. For example, places in the ocean that are cooler or less acidic than areas around them. And are there compatible or incompatible uses within the proposed boundary or nearby? And so this, I think, is a really interesting example from the Central Eastern Marine Park in Australia, which was just established in 2018 as part of a regional network in Australia. And you'll see this long north-south component. It's a very vertical park. And the reason for that is because the East Australian current is changing and species are moving south into deeper, colder water. And so this very vertical orientation of the boundary allows for that species migration over time. And in addition to that, you'll also see the horizontal connection to the coast of Australia, allowing for that offshore migration into deeper waters. So this MPA has really been designed for connectivity and change. And I think it's an interesting example of how we need to think about boundaries in the future. Next slide. We also know that MPAs take a long time to establish, and climate pressures are here now and are changing the behavior and the movement of species as well as the area of habitats. And so we should be thinking about dynamic measures as components of broader networks that are more responsive and nimble to environmental conditions. And this is one example of areas where speed limits are enforced for shipping in order to protect endangered right whales off the coast of the United States. These are not MPAs, they turn on and off, but they complement long-term MPAs that are the backbone of a conservation network. Next slide. The report includes a list of types of conservation actions that can help managers think about how they want to build in more adaptation and resilience into their management plans. So those include things like alleviating climate impacts, managing dynamic conditions, protecting habitat. So, this could just be ensuring that secondary non-climate impacts like dredging are not damaging valuable bottom habitats. Undertaking active habitat and species recovery and restoration, reducing human disturbance, managing for invasive species, water quality management, again, a non-climate stressor that can have cumulative impacts with climate stressors. So by reducing those non-climate stressors, you're helping to build that resilience in. And then promoting education. And I think promoting education is really important for a variety of reasons. It can help target audiences to try to reduce destructive behavior. For example, maybe destructive types of fishing or other types of tourism activities that teach people not to stand on the coral. But it can also have a component of helping people understand the changes that we're seeing in the ocean due to climate change and understand that the ocean of the future is going to look different and to start being ready to participate in management decisions about what that will look like. Next slide. So this slide talks about representativeness, replication and refugia. These are core components of an MPA network and are also especially important during climate change. I think many of you are familiar with these. I would just note that topics like representativeness and replication are especially important because we do need to make sure that if a certain area is damaged or destroyed due to climate impacts, there are other areas that have been protected elsewhere that can help reseed or replenish some broader regional areas. Next slide. Also ecological connectivity, a core component of MPA networks. And this refers to how species, propagals, and materials move through space and time. And so it's really important to design MPAs that are either large enough to encompass connectivity or be part of a network that is designed to conserve connectivity. So that includes different components of a species life cycle, for example. Next slide. So the next principle is to ensure equitable and inclusive design. And this notes that that is important for management in support of the adaptation, resilience, and well-being of human communities, cultural practices, and values. So next slide. So when we talk about equity, and I'll note that equity is a key component of the global biodiversity framework. So we've made a commitment to work toward equity, and I think we need to be thinking about what that looks like in an MPA design process. So it means sharing the burdens of climate change and ensuring that the impacts, costs, and benefits are distributed more equally across society, recognizing the rights and diversities of identities, values, knowledge systems, and institutions. And this includes rights holders such as Indigenous peoples, as well as stakeholders, and then fair procedure in decision-making. And equity is particularly important because climate tends to magnify inequities. That means the burdens of climate change tend to fall on those who are most disenfranchised and lack power and voice in decision-making. So we really need to take proactive steps to try to address that. The next slide. And inclusivity is really around making sure that diverse communities and peoples, particularly Indigenous peoples and underserved communities, are included early on in the decision-making process, and that the decision-making process allows room for their values and perspectives to be heard and to be considered in decision-making. And finally, the last principle is around considering holistic co-benefits. So here we're talking about safeguarding and strengthening climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience co-benefits while acknowledging the full spectrum of ecosystem services for people. Next slide. So we know that the main purpose of a protected area is the long-term conservation of biodiversity and its associated ecosystem benefits. But we also recognize that protected areas have a host of other benefits, social, economic, cultural, and they also can have very important climate co-benefits. They are important areas for carbon storage, particularly blue carbon habitats, such as seagrasses, mangroves, and salt marshes. They can help buffer against coastal storms that are exacerbated by climate change. They can provide economic and social resilience to climate impacts by providing more food security. So those are some examples of climate-related co-benefits that protected areas can have. And so it's really important to explicitly consider these when planning our MPAs. And good ways to do that include using participatory methods that explicitly consider these different types of benefits, using the best available evidence, including Indigenous and local knowledge, using mapping as a tool to really provide a common understanding and common information base for people involved in decision-making, and being transparent around the process and evidence used, and acknowledging trade-offs and potential win-wins between different objectives. Next slide. One topic I just wanted to touch on is this issue of climate mitigation technologies and MPAs. We know that the ocean is increasingly crowded, and the ocean is a focal point for climate mitigation. And that may include carbon dioxide removal technologies, as well as blue carbon conservation and renewable energy. And so I think the rule of thumb here is that technologies in and near MPA should not detract from conservation objectives, and that we have tools like ocean use profiles and regulatory impact analysis that can help us identify where those technologies may be appropriate or where they may lead to conflicts, and that we recognize that on a broader seascape level, that these technologies are part of a holistic approach to managing marine ecosystems. Next slide. So in brief, I just wanted to recap some of our key findings from this report, which are that there's an urgency to include climate change in MPA planning. We have an urgency to work toward 30 by 30 and to deliver meaningful conservation benefits, not just reach the 30% number. And if we're going to achieve meaningful conservation, we need to include climate change in our planning. And that these 4 principles can help guide countries' MPAs and network planning, that there are new opportunities for MPA networks through the High Seas Treaty, which is going to be, I think, a huge focal area over the next several years, and that best practices and learning are evolving, and there is a need for continued exchange among managers and policymakers. Next slide. So I just want to thank you for my portion of this presentation. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to contribute additional information. I think we're going to go to a poll here in just a minute, and then we will switch to our case study presenters. So I'll turn it over to Yen for the poll. We'll just give you a few minutes to take a look at these 3 questions. So getting some interesting results here. I'm seeing that already people are experiencing either serious climate impacts within their marine protected area or MPA program, either serious impacts or some climate impacts currently and recently. I would say 80% of MPAs are already having that kind of climate impact. And then, of the 4 principles, seeing a lot of interest in more information on adaptation and resilience, as well as some of the other areas. Interesting to see that generating holistic co-benefits and understanding change are also of interest. And then for those of you who have stories or experiences, happy to follow up with you after this webinar if you want to discuss those further. We are hoping to build out some additional case studies beyond those in this published report. So Yen, I'll leave it to you when you're ready to close the poll, when you think we've got a good critical mass.
Thank you, Lauren. Right. We've got the majority of our participants who have answered the poll. Is that correct, Tim? Great.
Yes, we're at 100.
Amazing. Thanks so much for answering the poll, and we can close it now so we can move forward to the next part of our webinar. And I'll quickly share the results of the poll so that you can have a look while I'm introducing the next speaker. So now we'll move forward to the case studies that are actually part of this guidelines. And I will pass it on to Arthur Tuda from Kenya-Tanzania border case study, and to also Maina Mbui. So over to the both of you.
All right, thanks, Yen, and thanks for this opportunity. This presentation I'm going to make is about an effort that is taking place in the Western Indian Ocean region between Kenya and Tanzania to establish a transboundary marine conservation area. And it's still a work in progress, but I'm going to just point out or highlight some of the progress that we've made in the region. So with my colleague, Maina Mbui, I will also be in if there are any questions later. So let's move to the next slide. Yeah, so the area that I wanted to talk about, just on the first slide, just to show people where the Kenya-Tanzania border is. The first slide, please, on the introduction slide. I've missed something. So it's that red spot that I'm talking about. It's tiny, but it's big in reality. So it's an area that is shared between Kenya and Tanzania, and it's a very important area. So move to the next slide. And the reason why Kenya and Tanzania agreed way back some 8 years ago was because of the importance of this area in terms of marine biodiversity and the livelihood aspects that it supports and the ecosystem services from fishing, tourism, seaweed farming, and all that. So it's a very rich area, as you can see from that map that of data that we've collected over a period of time. And so because of that socio-ecological value that it has, the two countries agreed that they should work together to establish a joint management area. Next slide. And the objective really was to manage the area from an ecosystem service perspective, like an ecosystem-based approach, because it's an area that is important for communities on both sides of the border, especially the fishing communities. And the whole idea was also to ensure that these resources are conserved, but also continue to support livelihoods, and also focus on an adaptive approach where flexible approaches to planning are applied in the conservation planning process, and ensuring that all the social, ecological, and governance aspects are important. And this, of course, includes the climate issues. Next slide. Yeah, so there's a problem also that this area faces, as you can see from the map. There are many studies that have been done. This is just one of them that shows how vulnerable the area is across Kenya and Tanzania to climate stresses. So this is work that was done with my colleague, who is also in this, is part of this presentation, that looked at climate stresses and how the Kenya-Tanzania border area is vulnerable to climate stress. And this focused more on coral reefs, but also mangroves and other species facing serious threats. And this, of course, has a consequential effect on livelihoods and communities which rely on this area quite a lot. So that's the reason why it's important to really consider climate as an important factor in the planning process. Next slide. Also important are studies that have been done by Wildlife Conservation Society in Kenya over a long period of time that have established that this area has also important climate refugia. And this is because of the cold water flow from Mount Kilimanjaro that has helped some reef systems to thrive even when other systems are bleaching. So it's a very critical area in terms of conservation, because then we have important areas that can act as climate refuges. So these are part of the long studies that have been done by WCS and other partners, and it's built into the conservation plan that is currently ongoing. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the approach that we are using in this conservation planning is what we would call a modern portfolio approach, which really looks at maximizing returns for the given level of risk, that is climate risk. And it's about how can we maximize biodiversity protection and ecosystem services while minimizing vulnerability to climate change, but also taking into account the assets, the value of the system, all the risks, and the bigger portfolio, looking at the whole network approach to MPA management, but also trying to have a diversified system. So we have both community managed areas and fully protected areas in an integrated network system. So this is what we call a portfolio approach that tries to minimize the risk by having different sites that have got different values, but also risks in a bigger conservation area, and trying to sort of use a modular approach in planning for this area. So this is more like the approach that we have been looking at. Next slide. And it involves really incorporating a number of important factors. So one of the things and studies that have been done also over time with many partners, including WCS again, is looking at the adaptive capacity of communities on both sides of the border. So this is an important aspect when you're considering conservation areas. We rarely incorporate adaptive capacity into conservation planning, but these are important studies that are ongoing. Some have been completed, some are still ongoing, but we are seeing that for us to be able to manage a resilient system of transboundary marine conserved areas, we have to take into account the adaptive capacity of the different stakeholders and communities across that coastal area, because that will also determine how well the system will thrive. Next slide, please. So we've also looked at how strong the networks are of communities and partners on both sides of the border. This is important for adaptive capacity, looking at how stakeholders and communities are able to respond to change, and how connected they are, and how information flows across these systems to be able to respond to when changes occur. So these are all important parameters that we are including in that conservation plan. So it's not just about ecological aspects, but also strongly focusing on the social and capital issues, as well as institutional adaptive capacity. Next slide. At the core of this, of course, are communities. Local indigenous knowledge is also part and parcel of the conservation planning. So different partners, and mainly WCS, Wildlife Conservation Society, and other NGOs have been working a lot with communities on both sides of the border, and trying to sort of incorporate local knowledge into resource use planning and conservation of locally managed marine areas, looking at migratory fishes across border and how their livelihoods could be impacted by the conservation programs. So at the core really is the conservation, but also taking into account the role that local communities play in terms of resource utilization, but also sustaining those systems during times of change. Next. So other important issues that are emerging more recently, of course, are the issues of prioritizing important areas for blue carbon as an important aspect or consideration in conservation planning, and also working with governments who have taken a lot of interest in the blue carbon and incorporating this into their nationally determined contribution. So conservation planning really has evolved to incorporate new concepts like carbon, blue carbon, and also the value that these countries give into meeting their nationally determined contributions, and how that can also be part of the conservation planning process. Ecosystem-based adaptations and socioeconomic resilience. These are all important considerations now in conservation planning for climate change. So it's not just about ecological aspects, but these are the factors that actually increase resilience of the socio-ecological systems if we take them into account during conservation planning. And that's what's happening in the region currently. Next. Yeah, so I would say this is first of its kind in our region to try and take a strong climate resilience approach into transboundary marine conservation, looking at the use of good science, but also ensuring that governance and local knowledge are part of building a strong, resilient system of protected areas, aiming to protect, of course, biodiversity and important factors. So we hope that this is going to be like a future example of how climate and other factors can be taken into account in conservation planning, Of course, it has not been without challenges. Some of the challenges we've experienced when we started this process was, of course, data limitations, because we have limited data on climate projections. And when we started, we had very little data on ecological aspects of this system. We see a lot of dynamic baselines, species and ecosystem shifts. So what was of value 10 years ago may not be of value now as far as stakeholders are concerned. So how do we address those shifting baselines? But also sociopolitical constraints. So this is very important when you're doing transboundary conservation. So one side may be moving ahead so fast, the other side might be slow in terms of adopting some of these processes. So yes, as you plan for climate into marine conservation, I think important factors like data, changing dynamics of ecosystems and species, and sociopolitical constraints are factors that we must also take into account. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Arthur, and for covering, the nuance of transboundary conservation when it comes to MPAs. And also, it strikes me like the most, it's talked about conserving, but continuing to support livelihoods. So it's a very great quote that we can get from your presentation among all the other quotations that's very good as well to share with our audience. Great, thank you. So the next case study that we'll be presenting is from the Coral Triangle Center. So I like to call Riley Johani, where she will present the Iron Rune Island Marine Protected Area. Over to you, Riley.
Thank you, Jan. Hi, everyone. I will present the Iron Rune Island Marine Protected Area case study from Indonesia, and some of us are all online, among others Purwanto as well. Next, please. So the Iron Rune Marine Protected Area is situated in the Indonesia and the Coral Triangle region. Here you see a map of the Coral Triangle in the dark red. It's among the most diverse area for coral reefs and reef fish biodiversity. And the Banda Islands are right there in the center in the Banda Sea. Next, please. So here you see the map of the Banda Sea. It's one of the most, it's one of the deepest seas in the world. And the Banda Islands are 11 small islands, including a volcanic island called Gunung Api. And it stretches around 172 square kilometers. It's situated in the province of Central Maluku and has 18 villages, or around 20,000 people. It used to be the old Spice Islands, for those who know, in the 16th century, very important for spices like nutmeg as well. Next, please. And the marine biodiversity, among others, are ecosystems like coral reefs, mangrove, seagrass. It's a very important area for the blue whales and also for turtles and fish spawning aggregation sites. Next, please. Well, the threats are also there, especially destructive fishing practices, overfishing, coastal development, but climate change also is an issue on those around the small island ecosystems, and plastic pollution. Next, please. Within the Banda Islands, we have 4 types of MPA governance that we see here. It's an MPA that's managed by the national government. Iron Rune are MPAs managed by the provincial government, and Hatta Island is a locally managed marine area. So we have 4 types of MPA governance in the Banda Islands, and I will focus on Iron Rune that CTC has helped establish with the local government and the local communities. We are also working within the province of Maluku and North Maluku on other MPAs as well, including those that you see here, Aleasi Islands, Sula, and Buana Island MPA. Next, please. So we're really talking about a network of MPAs in the Banda Islands, as I mentioned, managed by national, provincial, and communities. And it's very important that we do include all stakeholders in this process. These are remote islands. It's a very, deep sea habitat that we deal with a high marine biodiversity. And in that context, we have developed very specific approach to establish and manage those MPAs. Next, please. So Ayandroen, just to give you some background, here are the conservation targets again listed, the threats, but also the zoning system. It consists of a core zone, limited utilization zone, which is the bulk of this MPA, and other types of zones. Next, please. So we really work closely with local stakeholders to assess the marine resources, particularly also to assess which habitats were of critical importance for the community, both in terms of their culture, but also in terms of their livelihoods. And it was also key to look at data sets of coral reefs that have survived El Nino events before. And based on those historical data as well, we developed the zoning system over a period of 3 years. It took us 3 years actually to help establish this MPA, including getting a consensus on these boundaries from different stakeholders. Next, please. So the monitoring of those conservation targets included the reef health monitoring, but also resource use in terms of how these resources are used day to day. Mangrove seagrass service, but also extensive socioeconomic data were collected, as well as a special monitoring program was set up for spawning sites in this area, particularly for fisheries. Next, please. So as I mentioned, the whole process took us 3 years in terms of data collection, to the point that the MPA was established in 2021 by the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, managed by the provincial government. Next, please. And the zoning design is included here in terms of total area. You see here, it includes also a capture fishery subzone, a port zone, and other zones like for the tourism activities, as well as the capture fisheries. It took a lot of overlays in terms of also the marine tenure systems in this area. Communities have a strong marine tenure system in these and around those islands that were also taken into account in setting up the zoning system. Next, please. So when this zoning system was designed, several climate change factors were taken into account so that it was actually more resilient in the face of climate change, including representation of key habitats, replication, resilience factors, as well as upwelling areas to ensure that the areas were well replenished with cold water from the deep sea, as well as, again, influenced also by local wisdom. SASI is the name for traditional management practices there, and the local people have temporary closures of specific areas around the islands to help replenish specific species around their village. Next, please. So there's sort of 10 conservation programs that we continue until now. This is just a process for the community involvement in MPA establishment that we used in terms of collecting data, zoning system, the design, as well as setting up a working group, including communities in the management plan development. So it was a very participatory approach where we involved the local communities from day one in the design of the MPA. Next, please. So here are the zoning design considerations that we helped facilitate during the process, including series of community meetings. I think we held more than 20 community meetings involving hundreds of people in this process. We also conducted a lot of capacity building programs to inform or get people at the same level in terms of the MPA concept design, MPA for fisheries, also for climate change, that everyone was on the same page. It was also a collaborative working group, including a local government, local universities, local communities, the customary leaders, and other NGOs working in this area. And public consultations were held also at the provincial level, with support also from the national level government. Next, please. So the conservation programs that we conduct until now include surveillance and resource use monitoring. So this is very important to literally look at the use of the coastal and marine ecosystems in the MPA in terms of what type of fishing, where do the boats come from, what type of fish they catch, any violations occur in relation to the zoning system and so on. Next, please. We also established a community surveillance group. Because it's so remote, we really need to engage and help the help from the local communities living in those areas to support the surveillance, and particularly with the observations of how the resources are used. Next, please. Capacity building, again, this is very important, particularly also to strengthen the local MPA management authorities, the link to sustainable fisheries, and also on the surveillance and monitoring aspects of the implementation of the management plan. So we also conduct a lot of trainings for different stakeholders to this effort. Next, please. So the reef health monitoring, we do it every 2 years and collect data on coral coverage, fish abundance, but also carrying capacity. There is also tourism activities there, particularly from liveaboards, bring a lot of divers there, also larger boats, and it is a growing activity in this area. Next, please. And management effectiveness. So the government of Indonesia has a tool to measure the management effectiveness of MPAs. And here it was applied, the score was 64% in 2024, since 2021 when it was established. And it's really a great tool to see how the MPA is managed in terms of effective protection, in terms of involvement of local communities, but also in terms of implementing the management plan and ensuring the inclusiveness of the approach. Next, please. And then community awareness, it's also for us a priority to reach out to schools to really also support the ocean literacy in these areas, continue engagement of local communities, and provide public information on the MPA, particularly in terms of diversity, but also in terms of the zoning plan. Next, please. Another great, I think, study was done with on the Banda deep sea snapper fisheries. It's an amazing area for deep sea snapper fishery. More than actually 210 deep sea snapper species were found here. And we engaged the local fishermen who have incredible knowledge of these fisheries in recording data over a period of 2 years in this area. And that database is also key for us to manage the fisheries around this island. But again, the diversity just in terms of fish species, but also core diversity is amazing. Next, please. And then, as we said, also, unfortunately, in those remote areas, plastic pollution is also a big issue. And we've supported a women group in the island of Roon, who's doing a great job in collecting the plastic waste, engaging the local community. and ensuring the transportation of this plastic waste to neighboring waste management processors. But it's besides the issue of climate change, overfishing, destructive fishing, the plastic pollution issue is also very much an issue in these islands. So it's the combination that exacerbates the impact on the coastal and marine ecosystems. So we do require an integrated approach to abate those threats. Next, please. So the gender equality social inclusion approach that we try to implement in all of our projects, we've also done this in Ayan Islands, particularly also in the Banda Islands as a whole, in terms of getting more insight in the different groups out there, not only women, but also youth groups, and also different ethnic groups within these communities. And who has the access, who has the assets in these areas, and understand how we can or be informed in terms of potential gaps within our approach to ensure the benefits go to all the communities and all the community members in those villages. Next, please. And lastly, the conservation programs very much aligned with the traditional marine resource management systems in Maluku and particularly also in Ayan. So we've done also a lot of studies on the status and management of the marine tenure systems and the traditional management practices in terms of closing the resources temporary to help replenish specific species like, for example, trochus or specific fish species. So marine tenure is really very much delineated according to the local customs, and it also has its own government institutions related to that. So we integrate this very much into the overall design and implementation of the management. And the traditional management practices are called SASI in Maluku. Next, please. So this is just one of the signs of the SASI system, and this is the actual closure of it. And they will plant these types of signs in the sea, so all communities know that it's now closed season for harvesting. Next, please. So that, I think, was the last slide in terms of lessons learned for the Ayan MPA development. I think for most MPAs, it's community involvement that is essential for the entire process, from the planning to the implementation. And it's so crucial that you build ownership, trust, and local stewardship in the process. Capacity building, we also noted that you do need to provide a training for different groups to ensure everyone is on the same page moving forward, but also building on the local knowledge, especially also in Maluku, where the traditional management systems are still very strong. The integration of local culture into the formal systems is something that we help facilitate, particularly for Ayan. And the zoning design, it had to be very adaptive and inclusive and balance the different needs, the different priorities, both in terms of the local users living there, but also balancing ecological protection with livelihoods. Next, please. I think that was the last slide, but again, it's still very much, we're still very much involved in the management of Ayan. And it's really, I think, a great case study on how you can set up such an MPA in a very remote area like in the Banda Sea. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, really. And it's great to see how communities were included from the very beginning of the process, with local wisdom, guiding the whole process. So up next in case studies, we will be presenting the UK highly protected marine areas, and this will be presented by JNCC. We have Lindsay Grant. Lindsay, here you go. and over to you.
Thanks, Yen. Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and also good morning and also good evening for some of you as well. As Yen said, my name is Lindsay Grant and I work in the Marine Protected Areas team at the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, or JNCC. For those who may not know who we are, JNCC are a UK public body working across marine and terrestrial conservation, providing independent scientific advice to all 4 governments in the UK, as well as working internationally. We are also one of the founding partners for the International Partnership for MPAs, Biodiversity and Climate Change as well, which you can see on the slide here. So I'm here today to talk to you about how highly protected marine areas, or HPMAs, in England seas were established, and showcase how this process can demonstrate core principles of the establishing MPAs in a changing climate guidance, which is now published. So first, I want to give you a bit of background to how HPMAs were designated in England and what that means. So HPMAs, in the context of the English sea designations, are defined as areas of the sea designated for the protection and recovery of whole marine ecosystems. They prohibit extractive, destructive, and depositional uses, allowing only non-damaging levels of other activities to the extent permitted by international law, which you can see on the slide here. So these differ from other designations of MPAs in the UK, which traditionally protect specific features rather than the whole ecosystem. So by setting aside some areas of the sea and affording them higher levels of protection, we hope that this will allow our marine nature to recover and thrive. Next slide, please, Yen. Thank you. So this is just a basic timeline showing how we went from a government commissioned review of HPMAs to the designation of the 3 HPMAs in English waters in 2023. So in 2019, the government commissioned an independent review into HPMAs and whether or how they could be introduced into UK waters. This was known as the Benyon Review, which was published in 2020 along with 25 recommendations. So the government accepted key recommendations from this Benyon Review in 2021, and work began on proposals for HPMAs with areas of ecological interest, or AEIs, being put to ministers, and then a public consultation in 2022. After that consultation, 3 sites moved forward to designation in 2023. Next slide, please. So this map shows the locations of those 3 HPMAs in the red circles. The thick black line, which you can see on the screen as well, defines what is known as the UK's territorial sea. So anything from the coastline up to this thick black line is considered to be inshore, and anything from the thick black line out to the edge of the UK continental shelf is considered as offshore. So when we talk about inshore, offshore, I don't mean necessarily high seas. So you can see Allenby Bay HPMA in the north west of England there, and northeast of Farnes Deep in the northeast of England, and then all the way down in the south you've got Dolphin Head HPMA as well. Next slide, please, Yen. So the HPMA process was the first UK MPA designation project to include climate-specific criteria in the selection of sites. This was reflected in the ecological selection criteria, which was developed by ourselves, JNCC, in collaboration with Natural England as well. So these were used to assess potential locations for HPMAs and help build a short list of locations to which socio-economic criteria was then applied afterwards. The Benyon Review had specifically recommended that the capacity to protect blue carbon habitats and other important ecosystem services should be an underlying principle for site selection. So this was the connection there. So there were 3 core ecological principles, the third one being ecosystem services, which you can see here. This included 2 climate change considerations. If you could go to the next slide, please, Yen. So there was 3A, which required a location to include habitat considered to be of importance to long-term storage of carbon, which demonstrates how the second principle, which is strengthen adaptation and resilience, or more specifically, it's proactively provide effective area-based conservation in a changing climate to support adaptive and resilient ecosystems. So this shows how that could be incorporated into MPA design by specifically targeting the inclusion of blue carbon habitats from the beginning of the design process. So this involved deliberately drawing MPA boundaries to encompass blue carbon habitats, so going beyond simply including them within a site, and by identifying and targeting hotspots of blue carbon and shaping the MPA or HPMA boundaries around these key areas. So then there's also point 3C. Sorry, if you could just go back, please, Yen, sorry. There was also point 3C. So this required the inclusion of locations that support habitats important for flood and erosion protection. So this is a strong example of how the fourth principle, which is generate holistic co-benefits, can be practically applied. By protecting habitats that offer ecosystem services such as buffering against extreme storms and also providing long-term coastal erosion control, we're not only enhancing biodiversity, but also building climate resilience. So this principle also emphasizes the importance of community-based approaches in setting goals that reflect climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience priorities. As part of the designation process, as I mentioned, a public consultation was held, which aligns quite well with this principle as well. So now I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about two of our HPMAs that reflect these ecological selection criteria and scored quite well against 3A and 3C that you can see here. Next slide, please, Jen. Thank you. So this is northeast of Farns Deep HPMA, which is an offshore site that spans approximately 492 kilometers squared with depths ranging from 50 to 100 meters. The seabed here is a rich mosaic of habitats, including over 27 kilometers squared of subtidal mud, which makes up more than 5% of the site's total area. So you can see this mud represented in the kind of darker brown color to the west of the site in the image here. So these large areas of muddy habitats are particularly significant. Across English waters, seabed mud habitats have been identified as holding substantial stocks of sequestered carbon. This makes them critically important habitats in mitigating climate change. Protecting and recovering these habitats not only supports biodiversity, but also enhances the site's potential as a nature-based solution to climate change. This highlights the broader value of MPAs and MPA networks in strengthening the climate resilience of marine ecosystems. And then if you could go to the next slide, please, Jen. So this is Allenby Bay HPMA, which is our inshore HPMA. It covers approximately 27.6 kilometers squared with depths up to 6.6 meters. So a very different habitat to the northeast of Farns Deep HPMA that we just looked at. This site contains approximately 13 kilometers squared of blue carbon habitats that capture and store carbon and includes intertidal sand, muddy sand, and subtidal sands. So these blue carbon habitats cover nearly 50% of this HPMA. The site also protects honeycomb reefs, which you can see in the image at the top there of the slide, and blue mussel beds, which can provide both water purification and important coastal erosion protection. Next slide, please. So climate change considerations have been embedded in the designation of HPMAs in England beyond just the ecological site selection criteria. These considerations are also reflected in the monitoring frameworks being developed for HPMAs. A dedicated HPMA monitoring team has been established. However, we are still in the early stages of monitoring, so we're still focused on establishing baseline conditions at the moment. In June 2023, a 2-year project was launched to collect and analyse baseline ecological data in 2 offshore HPMAs. This project also includes strategic work to inform how offshore HPMAs should be monitored into the future as well. In September 2023, the first monitoring surveys were conducted in these offshore sites. For example, during the northeast of Farns Deep survey, opportunistic core samples were taken, and these were used to estimate the HPMA that this HPMA contains approximately 1.7 million tons of sediment organic carbon, which is a significant carbon stock, as you can imagine. The monitoring team have also leveraged long-term data sets to understand past and ongoing changes in northeast of Farnes Deep HPMA and Dolphin Head HPMA. This included 63 years of continuous plankton recorder data, which is the longest running marine survey globally, as well as 30 years of environmental data from the northern North Sea and also the Eastern Channel regions of English waters. These data sets were used to investigate changes in plankton communities in the northeast Farnes Deep and Dolphin Head HPMA and surrounding areas. This was undertaken because plankton are sensitive indicators of environmental change, such as rising sea temperatures, and often show early signs of ecosystem shifts. Additionally, data from the monitoring surveys are being used to study the structure of the food web in northeast of Farnes Deep through a stable isotope analysis. This will help us to understand how energy flows through the ecosystem and how it may be impacted by climate change. Because HPMAs protect entire ecosystems, they provide a unique opportunity to monitor a broad range of ecosystem elements, including plankton and food webs, as I just mentioned. So this supports a more holistic understanding of ecosystem change and demonstrates how HPMA designations can be used to monitor and adapt to climate-driven changes, such as described in Principle 1, Understanding Change. To support future marine protection efforts, DEFRA has also commissioned an evaluation of the first 3 HPMAs. This evaluation was conducted by Ipsos with RPA and APB and it ran from late 2023 to early 2025 and used a mixed methods approach. So this included a national survey of over 2,400 adults, 28 in-depth interviews of stakeholders. It included focus groups, reviews of over 30 documents, and also an analysis of secondary data from sources like ONS, Visit Britain, and MMO. This work will produce 4 key outputs, so an evaluation framework for the HPMA programme, a process evaluation from consultation to designation, a socio-economic baseline to complement ecological data from JNCC and Natural England, and a reflections and recommendations document as well. This approach helped build a comprehensive ecological, socioeconomic, and cultural baseline, which is essential for adaptive management, as outlined in Principle 1 of the MPA guidance. It also highlighted the importance of inclusive engagement and understanding community values, aligning with Principle 3 on equitable and participatory design. So findings right now aren't published. The methodology itself, however, demonstrates how robust, inclusive, and evidence-based approaches can inform both effective marine protection and fair governance. And yeah, the establishment of HMAs in England embedded climate change considerations from the outset, and these have been carried through into monitoring and evaluation. This approach supports adaptive management by building a strong foundation of ecological, social, and cultural understanding, whilst also highlighting the importance of inclusive evidence-based processes for future marine protection, with evaluation feeding back into the design. Importantly, climate change considerations should not be seen as a one-off step. They must be maintained throughout the life of the HPMA and regularly reviewed as conditions change. This makes the process truly iterative. We design with climate in mind, but we must also monitor, evaluate, and adapt our management over time to ensure climate remains effectively addressed. So hopefully that's given you a good overview, and you're able to see how this case study has demonstrated the principles from the guidance. Thank you very much for listening, and I will hand back over to Yen.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. We design with climate in mind. We must also evaluate. We must also monitor, evaluate, and adapt our management. Thank you. That's really great to show the process of HPMAs, or highly protected marine areas. And now we will open the floor to some questions from our audience. So I'll pass it on to Lauren. Thanks, Lindsay, again.
Thank you, Jan. And yeah, thanks to all of our case study presenters. Those were just such great examples of how these kinds of discussions and tools and decisions are playing out in real places around the world. So thank you for that. So yes, just wanted to invite people to post your questions in the chat or raise any questions that you have. We'd love to continue the conversation. And I did invite folks to post resources or stories about places that you're involved in. Some of you have done that, which is great. So just open the floor to conversation. And I'll just note that, we do have several case studies in the report itself. You've heard from 3 of them today. And we would love to build out additional case studies and continue this information sharing from folks involved in this work. So even if you don't have something today, you can always get in touch with us through the climate change specialist group of the IUCN WCPA. And we hope to be working with the international partnership to produce some more case studies going forward. And yes, recognize that it's late in some places, so folks are having to sign off, but we really appreciate folks joining. And thanks to Martina posting lots of ideas. Thanks for that, and also the YMC maybe.
Thank you, Lauren. Many of them actually are not from this year, but they are as well recent works I did. So I hope they will be useful for you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments, questions people want to share? I see a comment from Rosie in the chat. I'm from the UK, so it was really interesting to see what marine conservation measures we have in place. This was so interesting. So thanks, Rosie.
Lauren, if I may add something.
Yes.
There is also another initiative. First of all, I'd like to congratulate with the colleague from Kenya, since it's an area that I know a little bit. And with reference to Kenya, there is an initiative I led in collaboration with a local guy from the Mombasa County community. And we shaped this Ocean Club for the kids of this area. So the initiative was led for around 1 year up to last year, and we engaged many kids from the local communities and in particular from the Mombasa slums in activities related to ocean literacy, biodiversity conservation, plastic pollution, and subsequently we managed to collaborate also with a local girl who established a new waste recycling plant in the area, because we found out that there were a lot of illegal dynamics around the plastic waste, plastic picking, illegal, let's say, like criminal organizations somehow asking to women to collect this plastic, presenting themselves like official employees for the waste management facilities. But actually they were only interested in getting money, and then in the end the waste is ending in the coastal areas and in the water. So we teach the local kids to recognize also this kind of dynamics, and so this is something quite successful, and maybe I can share with you some videos, because we did a website, but the website is no longer available, I guess, but I can provide you some videos from the YouTube channel, which is still being available online. And that's all. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I see Simon Goodman put a comment in the chat saying, we're working on how to develop a strategy to mitigate climate impacts on MPAs in the Caspian Sea. here, many impacts are being driven by rapid sea level decline. So current MPAs are becoming obsolete, and then provided a link to a Nature article. So thank you for that, Simon. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add about that, but I will definitely follow up on that. And then from Charlotte Hudson, sharing a group of potential future case study projects, and would love to know if there's a way this community is connected to share experiences and lessons learned. Yeah, Charlotte, thank you so much for reminding folks of the LenFest work. LenFest funded a lot of great climate resilience work, primarily in the US, and some opportunities to change or to learn from different geographies. So definitely recommend people take a look at that link, and we will definitely think, Charlotte, about ways to continue the conversation.
We also have Simon here. I think he unmuted himself.
Oh, great.
Yeah, hi there. So I could sort of briefly just say a little bit more about our current work. So it's presently at an early stage. So the article that I posted the link to is a kind of a risk assessment looking at which of the Caspian MPAs are likely to be impacted as the sea levels continue to decline. So this decline is being driven by sort of increased rates of evaporation relative to water inflow. That's being sort of driven by sort of current climate heating. And there's a UNEP project which is starting up at the moment that is aiming to bring sort of Caspian governments and other kind of stakeholders together to evaluate different kinds of strategies. And sort of many of the things that have been raised today are the sort of things that will be sort of considered as part of that. But there's a huge amount of work to be done to evaluate exactly how the MPA should be adapted.
Thanks for providing that additional context, Simon. Yeah, it sounds like really relevant work. So look forward to hearing more about that. Just scanning through the comments. Okay, yeah, here's another from Abel. I'm currently conducting a research project focused on the social valuation of landscapes and their synergy with ecological connectivity, aiming to identify key areas for conservation of marine ecosystems of Colombia. And so is interested in asking people around initiatives related to nature-based solutions, particularly in areas significantly affected by coastal erosion. Yeah, thanks for that. And if anyone has suggestions or resources for Abel, please go ahead and put those in the chat. And thank you, Abel, for that. And if anyone wants to add, Abel, if you want to add anything more about that, about your comment, please feel free to unmute. And then Marina notes that she's also working on a report on reducing the impacts of fisheries on marine biodiversity as part of an IUCN task force. Thanks, Marina. Yeah, so lots of great suggestions. Stephanie, please go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Stephanie.
Well, to turn my camera on. Thanks, Lauren. I just had a quick question for Riley, if that's okay, and it was specifically in relation to any challenges she faced when working with local communities on the sort of getting the MPA established. I'm curious around any challenges about sort of the complex nature of climate change and all the integrate elements that come into sort of MPA establishment, but specifically how those were received by local communities and what sort of approaches were taken.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephanie, for your question. Yeah, initially the communities were quite skeptical in terms of the introduction of the MPA there. But our team and also the local government, we really tried to connect this to the local marine tenure systems that also incorporates conservation principles to support their community. And so we took our time to really get the communities on board. We learned from them and didn't try to rush it before we got actually the communities more and more aligned, with the MPA concept, but also building on their traditional wisdom. Because the islands are affected by sea level rise, there's also a lot of erosion around the islands. And they also understood, over the years, things have become worse for them in terms of living conditions. And these are very small island ecosystems. So the problems that we talked about were also quite, clear for the local community. So that combination of awareness of the threats plus their, traditional management practices really helped us to try to integrate all this knowledge and all the priority needs from the communities into the design of the MPA. And they have been involved from the beginning and continue to stay involved. And I think another key element was it to help support the creation of blue jobs, we call it. So we actually supported the local fishermen to collect data for the management of the MPA, since they actually were so good and knowledgeable about especially the fisheries around the islands. And so engaging communities in data collection was also a key element, as well as creating other opportunities. For example, the women group collecting waste management and facilitating blue jobs or alternative livelihood strategies for the communities. And at the same time, combine it with outreach programs for the community, trainings, but foremost, to engage them in the planning and the benefits an MPA can provide were some of the key elements of our strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, really. That's great context. Thanks for the question, Stephanie. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions or comments. If anybody has anything else.
Lauren, there was an in-chat good comment from Abel at 11:22.
Oh yeah, I think I mentioned that about looking for information related to ecosystems in Colombia. And yeah, so hopefully people can take a look at that. And if they have additional input, please add it. And I see that someone responded, Jerome responded, related to other nature-based solutions. So thanks for flagging that, Danielle. All right. Well, I just want to thank you all for coming. This has been a great turnout and a great discussion. And we're very excited to launch this new publication. We hope it will be useful and that you all will give us feedback based on how you're using it. And we do hope, as I said, to share more experiences and case studies in the future. So look forward to staying in touch with you all. And hope that many of you will be able to attend the World Conservation Congress or to attend some of the virtual options for those who can't be there in person. Thanks very much. And thanks very much to Yen and the Vital Sites team for hosting us.